Today, we're diving into something pretty amazing, the science of how our brains can actually, physically heal from trauma. It turns out, this incredible story of resilience is basically written right into our own biology.
So, let's just get right to the heart of it with a huge question. Is the emotional baggage from our childhood permanent? I mean, are we just stuck with it? For a really long time, a lot of people thought, yeah, pretty much. But what we're about to uncover is that the science tells a totally different story, and thankfully, it's a much more hopeful one. All right, so before we can really get into the healing part, we got to understand how a healthy brain is supposed to work. Just imagine for a second that your brain has this super skilled pilot sitting at the controls of all your emotions.
Now, the fancy term for what this pilot does is emotion regulation. And really, all that means is it's the process we use to manage our feelings. And this is key. It's not about bottling things up or pretending you don't feel anything. No way. It's more like steering. It's about influencing when you feel things and how you show them. And getting this right, it's absolutely fundamental to just feeling okay. So, this emotional pilot of yours has a whole toolkit of strategies, right? Some of them are super helpful. We call those adaptive. A great example is something called cognitive reappraisal. It just means looking at a situation differently. So instead of thinking, oh man, I totally failed that test, you reframe it as, okay, this is a good chance to figure out what I need to study more. Then you've got the unhelpful strategies, the maladaptive ones, like suppression. Just trying to shove your frustration down and ignore it. One of these leads to real growth, and the other? Well, research is pretty clear it usually just makes everything worse in the long run. Okay, so inside this emotional cockpit, you've got two main players. First up is the prefrontal cortex. Think of it as the brain's thoughtful CEO, the part that's in charge of planning and making smart decisions. And then you have the amygdala. This is your brain's super fast threat detector, kind of like your internal smoke alarm. Now, when everything's running smoothly, the prefrontal cortex has this top-down control. It can tell the amygdala, hey, chill out, it's not a real fire, and calm those alarm bells down. It's a really, really crucial partnership.
So, what happens when that finely tuned system gets thrown completely out of whack? Well, this is where things get serious. We're about to look at how trauma can literally rewire the brain's circuits.
A really important idea here is something called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs for short. And we're not talking about minor bumps in the road here. These are major, significant traumatic events, things like abuse, neglect, or seeing violence in the home. And because this stuff happens when the brain is still building itself, the impact can be just massive. And the stakes here are incredibly high. Research shows that experiencing even one of these ACEs is linked to a much, much higher risk for really serious struggles later on. Things like PTSD, depression, anxiety, even substance use disorders. It is so important to understand that this isn't some kind of moral failing. It's a biological response to stress that was just too much to handle.
So let's break down exactly how this happens. When a kid goes through something traumatic, that amygdala, the smoke alarm, remember, starts blaring. It sends a panic signal to another part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which basically hits the big red button for the body's emergency response, fight or flight. Now, when this happens over and over again, the whole system gets sensitized.
And what's the result of that? Well, the brain's entire alarm system gets recalibrated. It's like the sensitivity dial gets turned way, way up. It becomes hypervigilant, seeing threats everywhere, even when there's no real danger. And you can imagine, this can lead to a constant state of stress and anxiety that follows a person right into their adult life.
And look, this brain rewiring isn't just some abstract science concept, it has absolutely devastating consequences in the real world. A really powerful example of this is the vicious cycle that can develop between loneliness and addiction.
Yeah, check out this quote from the research. It points out a really powerful connection. Individuals misusing opioids often report heightened feelings of loneliness, creating a cycle in which increasing isolation drives drug use. So people who are misusing opioids often feel deeply lonely, and that isolation itself can push them to use more. It's a terrible feedback loop. Let's trace that cycle step by step. So it starts with social isolation and a lot of emotional pain. That can drive someone to use substances just to cope, to numb it out. But here's the trap. That drug use actually messes with the brain's own reward system. It makes it harder and harder to feel good from normal things, like just hanging out with people. So what happens? They pull away more, they get more isolated, which then drives them to use more. It's just a tragic self-feeding cycle.
But, and this is a really big but, this is not where the story ends.
In fact, the very same mechanism that allows the brain to be damaged and rewired by trauma, well, that's also the exact key to its healing.
And the hero of our story, the absolute game changer, is this one incredible concept: neuroplasticity. What is it? It's the brain's amazing lifelong ability to change, to adapt, to rewire itself by building new connections. I mean, it can literally change its own structure and how it works, all based on new experiences. You have to understand, this is a revolutionary shift in how we see the brain. We used to think that after a certain age, your brain was pretty much set in stone. That's it, you're done. But now, because we can actually see the brain in action with modern tech, we know that's not true. We know neuroplasticity is something we have for our entire lives, which means change is always possible.
Here's a really simple way to think about it. It's just like building a new habit or forging a new path in a forest. Every single time you have a new, positive, supportive experience, you are strengthening a new pathway in your brain. You are physically carving out new trails. And at the same time, those old, overgrown, trauma-based paths, they start to fade away because you're just not using them anymore.
Okay, so this science is amazing, but how do we actually use it? How do we put it into practice? Well, that's where modern therapies come in. They're designed specifically to tap into this power of neuroplasticity and help people rewrite their brain's story. And there are a bunch of really powerful, scientifically backed therapies that are built on this exact principle. You've probably heard of some of them, like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is all about changing those unhelpful thought patterns, or dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, which gives you real skills for handling intense emotions. And another big one is EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. The bottom line is, these are all just different tools for intentionally changing your brain for the better.
Let's zoom in on EMDR for a second, because it's a really fascinating process. It uses something called bilateral stimulation, which could be just following a finger with your eyes side to side, or maybe some gentle tapping. And you do this while you carefully bring a traumatic memory to mind. What researchers think is happening is that this process helps to weaken those super strong fear connections in the amygdala. It lets the brain file the memory away again, but this time without all of the intense, overwhelming emotional baggage. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about taking away its power over you.
And that brings us full circle, right back to where we started, but now with a completely new lens. The science is crystal clear. Our brains are not fixed. They are constantly being molded and shaped by our experiences. And that simple fact, that one idea, gives us so much power. It gives us agency, and it leaves us with one final and I think really empowering question to think about. If our brains are shaped by experience, then what new experiences can we choose, starting today, to begin building the future brain we actually want to live in?